So I'm reliably informed 45 countries represented and 45 plus languages. So just soak that in a second because when we're about to talk about a subject which is taking healthcare solutions around the globe, here's the globe. We're here right now. Um, my job this morning is to make my panelists shine, which should be really easy because they're a fantastic group and they've got an amazing, diverse background covering everything from clinical research organizations, CDMOs, investors, entrepreneurs, biotech, rare disease, everything manufacturing, quality, health and safety, regulatory pathways, market access, development, investment issues, not-for-profits, NGOs, etc. So you've got a panel that if you've got a specific question, there will be someone here who will answer it. And part of the plan is that I will do a very short intro. Each of the speakers will then give you their background because they know it much better than I do. And then we'll do a short sort of 30 to 45 minutes while I'll ask some specific questions to each of the panelists, which they'll be able to contribute to. And then we're going to turn it over to you. So you've got 45 minutes to come up with some barnstorming questions for us. We want them to come through, feel comfortable. And even if it's something you're not sure of, if there's a particular question that you want to aim for a particular speaker, please do. We have, for instance, Priya flew in from Boston and she's flying back out to Switzerland later. So she won the prize of who had the furthest distance. I lost the prize because I'm just in the Cambridge area, unfortunately. But so what I'd say is let's really make the most of this opportunity. I want you all to feel involved, feel engaged in this, and I'm looking around at all the faces. So if we're speaking too fast, if you need us to slow down, or if you want clarification on an answer, please do that. So you'll notice very neatly that we're sitting under the pictures, so you'll work out who's who. If I just start with Dr. Joanne Hackett. So Joanne Hackett is VP Health Systems Services at IQVIA, one of the largest and most successful CROs in the world. She also, as well as covering EMEA, so Europe, Middle East, and Africa, covers South Asia. Joanne's background is absolutely fascinating. And if you have a look at her background in the notes, everything from being one of the, anyone knows BioBeat, do you remember BioBeat? The top news and shakers and influencers. She's an entrepreneur. She's a health advocate. She teaches yoga. Talks about
Told you, people like that the most. Don't care about the rest.
and talks about wealth and health being inextricably linked. So her background, again, from all of her experience, is fantastic. And as well, we touched on it earlier about background. Again, we're talking about different backgrounds, parents from different countries, coming together. So again, there's this diverse perspective that you can put on, as well as being an absolute supporter of EBI, principally female empowerment and visibility. So again, another really big. And then we've got next Tony Hickson. Tony's background is, again, really varied, but he's a licensed professional, which means he can make decisions relating to healthcare investments and work with something called Imperial Innovation, some of you may have heard of. So that was a university spin out, but identified new businesses and helped them get started and set up. He's now working for Cancer Research UK and Cancer Research Horizons. And his background in that, of course, he comes from a professional background, having to, this professional background of identifying companies and supporting them, but also he's now in the not-for-profit space. So he's able to switch that over and obviously use a commercial lens making those decisions. So again, it's talking about healthcare around the globe. We're not just talking about commercial entities. We're talking about NGOs, not-for-profits and charities too. And then we've got Dr. Priya Singhal, who's EVP, Head of Development at Biogen, also worked at the likes of Vertex in the past in rare disease portfolios. He said she's flying back to headquarters in Switzerland later on. Really interesting, again, clinician by training and background, but also what she brings to this is this really wide experience of managing different businesses that are going into markets where there may not actually be an obvious patient group to get access. So how do you make those places so you get these great products to patients? She's going to have a really different perspective on that. And again, with that clinical background, we'll have a slightly different view. And again, what I'd say, the whole group here is You've got people who are actively involved in EDI and they're here today, again, for free will of time. This is not, as far as I'm aware, no one paid. So we're all here by choice for you. And then that's a really important thing too. And lastly, Dr. Maria Sola Nunez, and I had to look round because when it comes to your title, it's longer than I can remember. So Head of Group for Operations, a member of the exec committee at Lonza. And Lonza is a really important CDMO. So they do a lot of the manufacturing and things the companies can't do themselves, make sure it's sustainable, make sure it works. But she also has a big pharma background before that, so having worked to the likes of Novartis and Lilly for a considerable time. And what she brings to this as well as saying, and I loved, if you don't mind me sharing this, she said before that she was thinking about her family and about giving back, and hence why she's here today, because she thought it's important we pass on down to the next generation coming through. So, the reasons for being here again, really admirable. But thank you. Right, I'm going to hand over to them now, and they're going to tell you a bit more about their background. I'll start, Joanne, if that's okay with you, and then I'll be ready for your questions, Commissioner.
Great. Thank you all for coming today, and I appreciate that we're in a semicircle, so we can't quite get to look all the way around. I will try my best to move around the room with my head if possible. But as we know, it's quite important to think about the diversity when it comes to healthcare, because there are no two health systems that are the same. There are no two patients that are the same. There are no two data assets that are the same. And I started my career in genetics because I was one of those children who was diagnosed with a rare disease. And if it wasn't for a clinical trial, I wouldn't be sitting here today. So I spent the last 50 years giving back to the genetics community, especially because of that. And it just goes to show you the power that data can actually be used for greater good. And when a clinical trial was done many years ago, I think I just said 50, so I guess I gave that away. When the clinical trial was done that many years ago, we didn't really have access to diverse data. We barely have access to diverse data today, and this is, 50 years later, which is kind of shocking. And it's amazing to see how healthcare has progressed so substantially. And one of the things I've always advocated for is making sure that we take as broad as as the perspective as possible, because if we don't have our health, what do we have? And so when I was being introduced, the whole, "Ooh, she teaches yoga," and people love that for some reason. We're never impressed with the 15 years in university as a clinical geneticist, but the yoga seems to get people very excited. But the reason why the yoga is actually important is because if we don't have our health and we don't take care of our health, we have nothing. And you're all very young and shiny right now, and I promise you one day you won't be. And then you'll probably think back, oh, wait a minute, I think maybe she did have something to say about that. But things start to be a little bit more challenging as we get older. And if you've never really been ill, you don't necessarily understand how good it feels to be well. And we have a responsibility as citizens, as contributors to society, to take care of our own health as much as we have to put that responsibility back on corporate as well. So when we think about generating our own health data, and many people wear wearables and they take their own initiative to get gut microbiome, keep linking things like that, it's great if you're interested in your health, but the mechanisms to share that information is still not necessarily as easy as it should be. So my plea to you, and the things that I've done over the past 30 years or so with respect to healthcare, is the boring stuff. How do we make systems speak to each other? How can we make sure that data generated in India is going to be transmitted to Switzerland or to Boston, all places that Priya is clearly involved in as well. But just think about that. Right? We talk about being global citizens, but we're not. We don't have global healthcare. So why did the borders exist? And you can be very flippant and say, well, I don't want my data to be fair. Fair enough. But if you walk into the room and you ask someone to look at your rash, but you're not willing to show them, how is it going to be diagnosed? It's the same thing. So I often say to people, yes, we need to think about privacy and we need to think about the constraints around that, but you also have a responsibility to dare certainly need to matrix in order for that to be used wisely. So I've had my whole genome sequence. I also have a copy of my bank statement. Which one do you want to see? Right? Nobody wants to see the genome. because that's very little information unless you know how to understand it. Whereas the bank statement, you see where I live, how I spend my money, how much I get paid. We have to remember what constraints we put on healthcare data and sharing and our own personal responsibility as well. So I have spent, as I said, many years in the healthcare space trying to understand how do we find data, curate it, do all the boring stuff to make it work. But at the end of the day, if I'm going to be prescribed, say, Signal going to work for Joanne, how do you know it's going to work for me? So the concept of precision public health needs to really be embraced because to treat me, you need to know how to treat everyone. So how do we start to work around that? And yes, genetics is clearly an important part of that, but so is healthcare data as a whole. So think about that and many of the challenges that you come against in in your own personal life and your professional life. And when we think of health systems and how that can change dramatically, it usually comes down to the very simple principles of data, unfortunately, as boring as that is. So that's me.
That's great. Oh, hi everyone. Yeah, I'm Tony Higson. I'm Chief Business Officer at Cancer Research UK and Cancer Research Horizon. Um, my background is immunology by training. Worked for a company called Wellcome, which I'm so old that it became Glaxo Wellcome, which became GlaxoSmithKline. It was a long time ago that I worked for them. I spent about 6 years in the lab. That I was very lucky they put you on a sort of rotation scheme, so I got to experience QA and manufacturing and R&D. And that was a great way to start. But I soon realized that I wasn't going to be a successful scientist. But I wanted to do something that used that sort of scientific background. So I moved into business development, licensing, intellectual property, that side, and moved to a company called Murex Biotech, which was part of Abbott's, a big American pharma company. Did a bit of work in diagnostics. And then having done that for a few years, I moved to a small startup company. I was the sixth employee in a sort of new startup arising out of a Midlands university and working on medical instrumentation. And that was, with hindsight, a fantastic experience because it taught me, gave me some empathy, I guess, with that sort of roller coaster venture capital ride that you go on as being part of a startup. I did that for a few years and we exited that company actually quite remarkably back then to a Chinese biotech company. Quite unusual back then. Um, I moved back to London and joined Imperial College in their technology transfer licensing operation. Again, at that time, was quite small, and I was very lucky that I joined an incredibly forward-thinking organisation, very forward-thinking CEO who's at Berlin Place, who really had a vision, the organisation, of moving way beyond just university tech transfer and really growing the organisation. So we did an IPO, we did a private placement, and then we did an IPO, and we listed it on the London Stock Exchange and the AIM market. And over several years, we raised nearly 600 million in capital and deployed that back into university science, actually moving beyond Imperial College. So it was a great transition from sort of IP and licensing into investment and showing the power of that. Ultimately, we merged it with IP Group. It became Touchstone, and we merged it with IP Group. I worked for IP Group for about a year, and then an opportunity to join Cancer Research UK came up. And I thought it's a great opportunity to sort of try and sort of give something back, but at the same time use that sort of set of skills that I managed to luckily acquire on this journey. So I've been there for about 7 years now. And it's a really interesting thing we can perhaps more day.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Priya Singhal, and thank you for the introductions. And importantly, thank you for inviting me to this really important conversation because I think that we are in the midst of an absolute revolution. The question is, are we going to come out on top or not? And how do we assess that? And I want to echo what my colleagues here have said because I do think that the patient, the global patient, is our North Star. And if we cannot make drugs available, innovations available to patients around the world, we're not going to be successful. At least I wouldn't count that as success. And so, just by way of background, of my background, I'm an internist by training. And I think I've always been inspired by drug development. But if you had asked me growing up and training in Mumbai in India as an internist, I would have said I was going to do clinical medicine. I would have never expected to be sitting here and addressing all of you. on something that I really didn't formally train for. And I think for me, my life journey, my personal and professional journey was very serendipitous. I found myself in Boston in the mid 90s. I chose to stay home for several years and be a stay at home mom. And then when I decided that I was going to get back to be in the workforce, really drug development came calling. And I didn't really actually have all the data or the insights to even know that I was in the midst of sort of this epicenter of drug development in Cambridge, Massachusetts. But as soon as I got into it, it was apparent to me. And I have just stopped to reflect on the fact that drug development has changed quality of life and human survival. You go back to antibiotics, fast forward to the HIV era, and then fast forward to the immunotherapy, immuno-oncology revolution, which has really changed what cancer means. And now I'm really, really proud of where I am today and where I've been for the last 2 decades, because I've been able to contribute to some major groundbreaking therapies for neurology where, in the 90s and 80s, you were a neurologist, your best contribution was diagnosis. Really didn't have any tools in your armamentarium. And today, we have changed the lives of patients and children with spinal muscular atrophy, Alzheimer's disease, multiple sclerosis, and so many other rare diseases. So it's really a privilege to have been able to participate. But what I'm really, really excited about is what all of you are going to do. Because you are here to take that torch and bring a real revolution. And I think, as my colleagues have mentioned, unless we can stitch the ecosystem together and have it be seamless, we're not going to be able to do that. Whether it's policy, it's regulation, it's patient access, it's affordability, it's pricing, it's reimbursement. It is not connected. And if it's not connected, there are really very few incentives for any sponsor, any agency, any company to invest billions of dollars when you know that 9 times out of 10 you're going to fail. So when I wake up every morning, I know 9 times out of 10 I'm going to fail. My goal to my team and to my organization and to the company and really the system is, can we convert that to 7 out of 10 instead of 9 out of 10? I'm not aiming to succeed 10 out of 10. I know that's close to impossible. So the point here is, how do I convince, as head of development, when I oversee the clinical portfolio, capital allocation is my job. How do I convince the board, the industry to invest in what I think is a great scientific idea if I cannot convince them of any returns? It's really a very simple equation. And so that balance, I think we've lost it. And we now have drugs that are approved but do not get reimbursed. And that is really just not acceptable. So I am very, very convinced that unless we can make the ecosystem work, get connected, we cannot really participate in the revolution that science has brought to our doorstep. So science has the revolution. How do we now convert that into products that patients can receive everywhere?
I was like, that's our rallying call. We should all.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So maybe I make it more realistic. You have one molecule that makes it so in stick clinical trials, and now you have to launch it. And here is where the manufacturers come in. And if you're a small biotech, chances are that you won't have that manufacturing capabilities and you will need a contract manufacturer. And of course, you need to do that from much earlier on because you are not going to make the change in a phase 3. And that's why manufacturing is so critical, because you need to bring that product to that commercial scale and make sure it is available for all the patients worldwide.
I am the manufacturing quality person, which, of course, if you compare to cool research, is looks like boring, but I would like to make a plea to you and make sure that you understand all the intricacies and complexities that we have to bring that product to patients. Because you may have supply chain constraints, you may have problems with the process, you may have quality problems. You can't imagine how many times there is a lack of product in the market because of quality problems. And all of that is what the manufacturing and quality people, and of course, other functions, engineering, manufacturing, science, and technology, work together to bring that product to customer. So my career has always been in that area. I did a PhD in a MAP kinase cascade, so more in Saccharomyces. So that was the science part. And then I started to work for Lilly in Madrid. You will notice the Spanish accent and the two last names that drive everybody crazy. And I thought, am I going to like this? When I saw all this huge, big stainless steel equipment, at the beginning I was thinking, I'm not sure I'm going to like this. But then I stayed. And I have worked in shifts. I have led, for example, a second and a third shift. So I have worked during the night, during the late afternoons, um, male-dominated shifts, by the way. So I was the only woman at night. One time I woke up at 2 a.m. and I remember something. So I called the supervisor of the shift, and one of the operators called him and said, "Hey, your girlfriend is at the phone." And when he came back to pick up the phone, I say, I'm sorry, not your girlfriend, your boss. And I have a pepper, this and that and that and that we need to do. So again, interesting experiences. I have been head of production, head of MSAT, head of engineering. So I work for Lilly, both in Spain and then in the United States. And then I went to Switzerland to work for Novartis. I have overseen contract manufacturers, and now I am at the other side of it. I am working for. So thank you very much for the invitation. It's truly a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. Thank all of you. I just realized I'd give you a very brief introduction on me, just my background too. So again, fortunate enough to study here in Cambridge. Went into teaching initially, but the reason I'm in life sciences and life science recruitment is my mother, who was living over in the US, actually got quite sick. So she caught HIV/AIDS at the time. I was aware at that time, with the loss of a lot of her friends and other people in that community, of what we should be doing differently. And obviously, as a man in the UK with a mother with HIV/AIDS in the US, it was quite an unusual situation. So I threw myself into learning about the disease, learning about the mechanism of action, what availability there was of drugs that might help get her into hospice care. And it was when I was doing that I stumbled into life science recruitment. And I thought, well, if I can do something, even if it's just finding one person who might manage to make the difference and change it from 9 to 7 out of 10 or similar, then fantastic. So I started in life science recruitment. I've been doing that over 20 years. I worked in-house at AstraZeneca locally, worked at Icon briefly, a CRO as well, when they acquired a company I was working for at the time. And then most recently, and which has been a great experience, I've had 6 months at a small little biotech called Cellcentric, who are moving into pivotal registration studies for multiple myeloma. It's a really exciting time. They raised 120 million this year, and I helped them double in size, not just in the UK, but also in the US and other markets. So that's been a real eye opener. When I arrived there, we were 17, and they're now just hit 50. So that was a busy 6 months. So what I'm hopeful as well from doing this conversation is again, thinking globally. The project I'm most proud of was working with an organization called CEPI, the Coalition of Epidemic Preparedness Innovations. They were set up by Um, Wellcome Trust, as well as the Norwegian and Japanese government and others, and Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation at that time. And that was all about how do we spot the next pandemic? And based on World Health Organization, what can we do about that in advance? I was very lucky to be involved in the initial hire for both the CEO and the senior leadership team. But working with them in that NGO space, it became really clear about the importance of persuasion, influence, and contacts. and having a connected network globally. And again, back to, if you haven't, make sure you connect to each other and follow up after that. And Ipshita, you were saying, 10 years of the Gap Summits, accelerator programs, and everything else, there is an enormous network already out there that you can tap into. I'd say that would be the first step to help these systems connect. I'm going to ask some direct questions to the panelists, so bear with me. If anybody else on the panel wants to add to the answers, then please feel free to do so. But I'm going to start with Maria because you came back very quickly with your questions, so she's already in the good books. And I was just going to ask about how critical is sustainability and quality in that manufacturing process from Lonza's point of view. So as a CDMO, you've got these products, you've got to then get it out, and you've got to get it agreed, not just internally, but externally with the company you're working with. How do you go about that? And how do you enable that to work?
Well, quality is a must. It's your right to operate. If you don't have quality, forfeit it. You simply can't move forward, and that's essential to patients and essential to any manufacturing organization. So again, something you cannot compromise on. Now, sustainability is different because it's not regulated, right? However, it's more of an ethical imperative, or it's becoming also an expectation. At Lonza, we have 7 sustainable development goals from the UN that we have adopted as our core objectives. And these objectives evolve every year. And each of these SDGs is sponsored by one executive committee member. And he makes sure that we strive to achieve the target. And we measure them very thoroughly. We do not always meet. So that's to tell you that it's not an easy target. And on those, there are several aspects. So, for example, sustainable procurement. This is an area where we have been working very intensively. We partner with several organizations so that this is not our Lonza rules. And this is more something that helps our suppliers go towards a certain sustainability target, but can be also shared with other customers. So we are very careful to do that. And that's, for example, Together for Sustainability as an organization. And we have had several awards there, for example, Poor Body Silver as an example. And then on the carbon footprint, which becomes, I think, very tough to achieve, I would say, we have signed the Science-Based Target Initiatives, and that's something that a lot of companies have committed to. And I would say I mentioned it's a tough target because it's an absolute reduction target. And by that, I mean, it is not based on your sales as a relative metric of carbon footprint versus sales. Is you really need to reduce your carbon footprint. And this is especially difficult if your company is growing, which is our case. So you compare to a baseline, in our case, 2018, you need to reduce by 42%, but you are not the same size you were in 2018. You may have doubled it, and you need to reduce your carbon footprint by half. So this becomes really, really tough. And that includes scope 1 and 2, so what you generate, the electricity you consume, and also scope 3, which are those suppliers. So very, very challenging target, and we are working diligently to it. And I think as more companies, we would strive to be carbon neutral by 2050, which again, that's the blue sky. So first, let's get done the first part. And that means a lot of work, not only on our facilities, the ones that are running, but also on the ones that we are building. So whenever we build a new facility, we are already considering all of these elements, because you can imagine a facility that we built 25 years ago. was not built with this in mind, while the new ones, we try to minimize the carbon footprint of that future facility. And a facility is not like an office. It's much more difficult to do that.
I'd love to add
Please.
something. Thank you, Maria. I think it's very insightful what you said. We as sponsors, we are looking at several modalities. So we have small molecules, we have biologics, we have antisense oligonucleotides, we were even looking at gene therapies. And so what we've kind of come up with is a simple strategic approach, which is regional development, regional manufacturing, as well as dual manufacturing, so that we have backups. And so we have usually two processes running at the same time so that we never get into a shortage situation or a crisis situation. That's number one. Number two is we continuously forecast. And it gets quite complex because a lot of our products are partnered. And sometimes we are dependent on partners to tell us what the forecast is for their region, but we might be the manufacturer, or a CDMO might be a manufacturer. So it's quite complex. And I think it's really important to manage it well. So we look at regional, because now with the whole tariff situation, for example, policy plays deeply into this. It has been helpful because we develop for the US in the US, and then we develop for ex-US regions outside the US. And so that, at least for a while, that's going to be protective in terms of not getting too tied up in the policy changes, micro changes that are happening every day. So I just wanted to call those out because those are really current issues that we talk about every day as sponsors. How do we manage the risk and how do we balance the cost, quality, and making sure we have dual representation?
And I'm the pass it over also to Tony and Joanne. Tony, from your perspective as an investor in the past, but also in cancer, how important is sustainability in the decision making that you have to make, both now but also in the past?
Well, it's incredibly important because at the end of the day, we are a charity raising money from the public. And the donors, when they're providing money to us, they want to know that we are adopting a sustainable, ethical approach in everything we do. But actually, we in over the last few years or so, we've really upped the ante so that we now publish our sustainability stats in accordance with the same sort of level that you'd see from a major global pharmaceutical company. We hold ourselves to a standard higher than we actually need to legally because it is so important for the donors who want to.
Yeah, it's very similar. We have our own labs globally, and we don't have to have all of the accreditations that we do, but we have chosen to go over and above because it's folks like these on the panel who are asking us whether or not we have these credentials because it goes back to the reporting that needs to be done as well. And it's not just doing it for the sake of doing it, but if we invest in better processes and more sustainability today, it will make it all cheaper in the long run. And I know a lot of people argue, why pay for something if you don't need it? Well, that's the whole concept of healthcare as well. Let's not think about prevention before we think about treatment. So we take the same approach when it comes to labs and various facilities that we own as well.
This fits in quite nicely with the, which was another topic that you raised in our initial sort of exchanges about AI and machine learning, about how sustainability and systems talking come together. So I'd just be interested in your view on the things that you're seeing as it working for a big CRO that has access across all sorts of different parts of the healthcare ecosystem, how that fits together and what you're seeing that gives us cause for optimism.
Well, I think that there's a huge amount of optimism when it comes to using data in a different way, using systems in a different way. We are able to eliminate so many extremely boring aspects of any type of research or desktop research or anything to do with how labs run. It's quite shocking what we've been able to achieve. That being said, hate to break it to you, I know you guys are young and shiny, but AI's been around a while. We just didn't call it that. So we have been using, especially in our genetics program, we have a huge genomic and precision medicine center of excellence at IQVIA. We've been using AI for probably 10 years to be able to look through all of that data, try to understand where patterns are coming from. And we've been training algorithms. We have a massive database in-house that is all of our own data feeding and generating these LLMs. And to me, what's probably the most exciting part is that there's different ways to infer today than you could previously, mostly based on the fact that you can create synthetic data and extrapolate backwards. And again, not that it always has to be about genetics, but especially with genetics, being able to understand what is the reference genome from various parts of the world. Will drugs be able to be metabolized differently? Should these deletions be drug targets in the future? All of that is AI now. And it's shocking to see the advances going so quickly. But for me, I'm very optimistic that we're going to have a much more precision public health approach. And also, we will be able to be much more, we'll be able to utilize prevention in a very different way. And it's not just telling people exercise, eat healthier. It's much more tailored around what's going to work for them as individuals, but also finding patterns, right? The people who are diagnosed with early onset dementia, were they the people who had trouble conceiving? Were they the people who had acne? Were they the children who were wobbly and fell off their bike? If we know that the 5-year-old is the wobbly kid who's going to have dementia, how do we protect them? And that to me is where the power of AI is coming from.
Yeah, I'd love to add on the AI. It's a very, very important topic. I do think we've had machine learning, automation, and algorithms. I do think this is different. Generative AI for us has been different. And I did an interesting project. I went out in my R&D organization, and I learned that there were 88 projects on the ground that people were involved in, grassroots efforts. Nobody asked anybody to do anything. They were doing this. And so we said that we're going to take an enterprise approach. We're not going to stop the grassroots efforts, but we're going to scale up, identify key programs that would then be serviced, helped top down. So a top down initiative without kind of removing the bottoms up grassroots effort. And I narrowed it down to about 6. And just kind of stepping back, the biggest problem I'm facing is the tectonic shifts while costs are rising. So the average cost today, you can see different statistics in different areas, but I can tell you it's in a ballpark of 1.4 billion to 2.4 billion when you count the cost of failure and everything, taking a drug from an idea to a delivered drug. That's the cost. We are simply not going to be able to spend that. So the question is a mathematical one. And that is that if you have this pot of money and if you have this capital and you want to optimize and maximize the number of patients that you can reach with different drugs, high unmet need, where they don't have anything today, how will you divvy that up? And that is a question that's very hard because some of these diseases of high unmet need, we don't know the biomarker, we don't know the endpoints, and regulators and payers are very far away from any alignment or consensus. So why would a company invest in that? And so we tried to kind of set up our projects in AI to accelerate drug development. And I'll give you 2 examples. One is MS, multiple sclerosis. We have a lot of therapies for relapsing, remitting multiple sclerosis. We don't have anything for progressive multiple sclerosis, which is debilitating and leaves patients in wheelchairs. So we said, okay, we've got a very large database. How do we harness that database using algorithms to find a biomarker or a panel of biomarkers that would then allow us to fail early? It's very easy to say, let's fail early, but how do you fail early? Right? What is going to be your go decision? You need something. So that's one project that I wanted to mention. The other is, how do we reduce the size of a clinical trial? Because we pay per patient, right? So if we reduce the size of the clinical trial and without affecting the power, digital twins, synthetic arms, then we can actually do more trials, right? So how do we compress it? And that is a digital twin effort where you kind of proactively assess what's the heterogeneity of disease so that you can say you don't need 100 patients, you need 80 patients, but your power is still preserved to finding a true treatment effect of maybe 15%. And so these are really, really critical. Do I think AI is going to come up and find the best new drug in the next 2 years, I don't think so. But I'm very optimistic that if we wisely use it, we will find the best new drugs because it'll reduce the wastage in the system.
Fantastic. Tony, would you like to add from the not-for-profit? And I mean, like, cancer is a huge area with multiple modalities and multiple areas to focus on. So I'd be interested in your thoughts on this too, given there's probably a cost-conscious side of it too that goes on.
Yeah, I think well, putting aside internal organizational improvement uses of AI, yeah, we are predominantly a funder of research. We fund about 350 to 400 million pounds worth of research here, predominantly in the UK, but increasingly overseas. And the scientists that we are funding want to use AI as part of their armory of tools to develop new cancer drugs and new diagnostics. And we're seeing that. We're seeing the amazing advances of things like AlphaFold has really made democratized access to protein folding, and the uses of AI in cancer detection, the use of it for risk prediction, and of course the use in drug discovery. As scientists are using all that. But I guess the thing it's really opened up to us is the importance of data. So before you even get to AI, you need your data in the right format that the AI tools can be trained and validated on it. And our scientists, the people we are funding, are producing vast amounts of data, but they're not all producing it in the same format. They're not all producing it in the same place. It's all over the place. When you see it done well, it's amazing. So there was a group of scientists from Surrey University and Surrey NHS Trust produced a data set called Optimam, which was mammography images for breast cancer. And they had the foresight to create it in a very standardized way from the day up. And the demand from academia and industry for that data set is huge because it's been constructed in the right way. And we need to find ways to make sure all of our data sets are constructed in the same way, but without moving to a giant data lake type project, which will be completely unaffordable and impossible for everyone to manage. So we need to find a way to federate these data sets and to get the right balance between setting standards, but not imposing too much on the academics and people we're funding, because they need to adopt their own formats that's right for them, and they need time to analyze their own data sets before they publish them. But the whole thing is a balancing act that we're still sort of learning how to do. But from my position within Cancer Research Horizons, it is amazing the demand from industry and academia to access our data sets so they can apply AI to it.
Maria, I was just going to ask on that, the data set and the systems talking, how does that fit in for the CDMO model? Because again, back to the sustainability quality, you've got to be on top of that. And as you said, and I love that idea that the bigger the company you work with, the more difficult it is to stain your footprint, as it were, because there's more opportunity for that to grow. So yeah, just go quick.
Yeah, data is the key, obviously, and we are talking about public data, but there is also the company data, and that's a wealth uh, source for any company. So I think we are all working on accelerating the research and development of molecules, whether biologicals, chemical APIs, etc., and our internal databases and our proprietary models in AI help us do exactly that. And I am sure that's the same for all the companies. So here, size is a benefit, unlike for the carbon footprint, because you have more data, more knowledge on the process, and it can help you fit the model.
And this is a big question, but I'm conscious of what we're going to be moving towards the audience. So I hope you're getting ready. I'm quite tempted for you to get us all to get up and do some down dogs, but I won't go to. But I was going to ask the question about from each of the panelists, what incentives do you think need to be put in place, A, to help speed up this progress that we're looking at for global healthcare systems? And how do we overcome some of the regulatory hurdles? I know those are two enormous questions, but if I can we go around and let you each contribute, that would be great. Who would like to start? Oh, Danny.
I'll go for it because I can't really talk to a regulatory one, but I can talk to the very start of the process of funding research. So I guess what we are finding is that some of these problems are just so big that they cannot be handled by a single academic team in a single university. We need global team science to address some of these issues. So we are increasingly teaming up and adopting a role as a convener to try and bring the best research minds in the world together to tackle some of these bigger problems. And I think that this equally applies to other areas like climate change and areas like that. So we've launched a Cancer Grand Challenge scheme, which is a joint venture between us and the National Cancer Institute in the US. It's a $250 million scheme. And we give out awards of around $25 million to the best global team, no matter what universities they're in, to try and go after some of these really big challenges in cancer. And they're producing some really amazing stuff when you can bring that team sites together. And many people say, well, you can't do this. Some of these constructs have 11 universities involved in them from all around the world, who all have different ideas on how to handle IP and contractual templates. But you can make it work if you've got the willpower and the mind to do it. And these scientists all want to work together, so they all lobby furiously to make that happen as well. And we're just starting to see the outputs of some of these Cancer Grand Challenge global projects, and it is quite amazing. And then the other area, just briefly, I'll talk about is in areas that are more broken. So areas like childhood cancer, is sort of market failure area, because most childhood cancers are very small niche diseases. And industry are behaving very rationally. The size of these indications doesn't justify the billions of dollars they'd have to spend to get a drug to market. So it needs governments and it needs charities to step in and take more of that heavy lifting to make a difference there. So again, we've adopted a global approach. The global pediatric community, the UK pediatric community is not large enough to sustain a drug discovery pipeline. We need to think globally about this. So we've teamed up with LifeArc and a soon-to-be announced third partner, will be announced in a couple of weeks. And we formed a global consortium, and this is going after brand new ways of tackling childhood cancer. Because there are incentives to pull childhood cancer things, but they're not really working, as in vouchers and rare orphan disease type things. So we're going to try and create some push pressure. We're going to try and create the front of the pipeline and then look to governments and charities to help us move them further down the path. It's called See Further. And we're just really starting out on that journey now. But I think that is an example, again, on this global theme, the need to team up globally and the need for governments and charities to step in and almost create so much inertia that it's easier for industry to pick it up at the end of the pathway.
Mm.
You
I'll just build on that slightly. There was a project that we did a couple of years ago with Welcome, and I was delighted because what the question that they were trying to address was very simply, how do we find these various different data assets that could be joined together to have a larger pool of data? And then the interesting thing that they did from that, they then went back and they looked at the grants that they had been given out to individuals who were in these types of areas of research. And then as a requirement, they were going to put it into the funding mechanism of some description to say that that data was going to have to be pooled. And I think that is a massive incentive that it doesn't just have to be charities, but funders could actually do, because I'm sure 10 years ago, you wouldn't remember half of the different individuals who applied for grants and who got the funding. What was the outcome? Were there 3 or 4 projects maybe the same? Could they have been combined? It's just easier to do that now. And the other thing I often find is everybody thinks their data is sort of like a really beautiful baby, which isn't. And they really want it to be valuable and amazing and everybody to know about it. Do they even know where Ramsgate is? Perhaps not. Half of you don't know where Ramsgate is. It's somewhere in the UK. It's a tiny little place. If they have a database with 150 curated data points, they think it's great. But the world is a big place. The 150 plus 150 plus 150, when you finally get the power, going back to previous comments, be able to make some of those insights. So IQVIA is known as the human data science company for the very fact that we transact more data points in any given minutes than banks do in months. We have this ability to convene that data and pull it together so that industry can actually go in and look for more patterns, more diversity. And that's where the power comes from. It's that convening, it's pulling together to be able to say we've got 150 in the UK, there's 100 in Australia. But when you finally pull it all together, you have to think about it in a very different way, that it's not yours to hold. It's yours to be able to have access to and to share as well. There's a responsibility with collecting it.
I can go next. So, it's a really big topic, and I feel very passionately about it. I want to start with a story and then tell you what I really think we're missing and trying to work on. So, one is I was just recently involved last year in a Massachusetts project for data harmonization. And this was actually commissioned by the Massachusetts governor and was, coordinated by Boston Consulting Group, which is a consulting company. And then they reached out to different people across different sectors. And I happened to be the biotech lead. It was very disappointing and shocking to learn that all the Harvard Medical School systems, they collect the hospitals. They have the Epic system. And you may have heard of Epic. It's a very big system where all the data is collected. Now, interestingly, all the hospitals, just even in Boston and Cambridge, Massachusetts, don't talk to each other, although they are all Epic. So, I wanted to kind of zoom out of that. And we did a lot of work to come up with an initiative, but it made me realize how small we are in this effort today. And, we can all do our projects and we can all do a lot of things. And I think we will make progress one project at a time. But the big picture for me is unless there's shared accountability and collective accountability from countries, regulators, policy makers, patient advocates, sponsors, and investigators, academic centers, everybody who contributes to this, we can't really make a dent in the problem. So, today, from a company and sponsors perspective, we have drugs that we are developing, clinical trials that we're running in more than 80 countries around the world. It's a lot of countries. They all have their own mechanisms. They all have their own sort of ideas about when they'll approve a drug or not approve it. So, harmonization, we are very far from it. And unless we hold everybody accountable, including all of us who are contributing to it, then we're going to do something because a patient is at the center of this. So, for example, if we have a drug that's approved, and the trials were run in that country and the country should be approving it, then the country must have a system whereby that can be made available and accessible. One of our pillars for today was accessibility for patients. And so it doesn't matter what we do if we're not going to make it accessible for patients. So I think shared accountability, holding up examples to countries, to companies, to everybody in the ecosystem is really important. And I do think it's possible because today's patient is not really, is a very literate patient. The patient advocacy groups are very well formed. So they can really be helpful. And I think we need to kind of bring their voice to the center because I feel like the patient's voice is getting drowned out in this, everybody trying to do different things.
Yeah.
Maybe if I can add
Cool.
on this, think on the countries you come from. When you need to launch, get the molecule approved in each of these countries. And that's where the local health authorities come in. And unfortunately, we don't have convergence on regulation. We have been working on that, and there is a lot going on, but there is still work to be done. So if you are under US FDA or EMA, lucky ones, you will get your molecule pretty fast. If you are in a smaller country, chances are you may have to wait a year or more. And then the same comes to changes, because there are certain authorities that will approve changes in the manufacturing process early on, benefits to it, and others that will take ages to do so. So the convergence of authorities as well as recognizing inspections are essential. Think, as I mentioned, FDA, EMA, they are the front runners, and there is convergence, and there is also mutual recognition agreements to avoid unnecessary inspections. And the third front, as I was mentioning, is the changes, which can be very complex for big manufacturers because you may have to build a molecule or you may have to manufacture 2 or 3 different processes depending on who has approved the changes that you have submitted and are waiting for approval.
Thank you. Excellent. I'm going to start to go to the audience. I was just thinking and reflecting on what you were saying as an author who I read a lot of books of, and he's got a lovely phrase for this detective of everybody counts or nobody counts. And I think if we're talking about patience and global accessibility, it's starting from that principle. And what's lovely, as I said, looking around, we were saying, was it 80 countries? Okay, that's a lot of countries involved there in data, and I know for all of you, you'll be covering but each of you here, as I said today, going out there for the future. And I love this idea of everyone being bright and shiny, but um, that, now's the time to make those connections, because if you can have the conversations and start them now before you need them, then there will be that moment where you think, I could really do with someone collaborating who has X experience, and you talk to someone else who says, it's not my area, but you need to speak to X and Y. Um, and as I said right at the beginning, Global Biotech Revolution, the Gap Summits, it's all voluntary. So sometimes I think, this pay it forward principle of put it out there, develop those things is really valuable. So we're going to go to the audience. Is that, wow, okay, excellent. There's arms up already.
Before you finish.
Yeah, for it. Are you ready, panelists? Okay.
Yes.
Hello, my name is Julia from Guatemala, and I work in scientific communications in the past 2 years with indigenous communities from Guatemala and Mexico. So, what we do is basically try to merge or create a link between traditional knowledge and heritage and healthcare systems, or not necessarily healthcare systems, also education and technology. But in healthcare, we found with another organization um, a link and better outcomes when you merge traditional knowledge and traditional practices with modern medical practices. And then we have an example of a young man who was diagnosed with colorectal cancer, and he went through his treatment, but also he went through his treatment, or well, not treatment, but some procedures with a traditional um, medical leader from his community. And he had a good outcome. He had a good chemotherapy outcome, and right now he's on surveillance. And we found this, but this is really hard to implement, especially in a country like Guatemala, where there's a lot of racism and discrimination. But we found that if we aim to people to merge these two healthcare systems, and especially with people who recognize themselves as indigenous, we have better outcomes. And I was wondering this. I know that Guatemala, Central America, is not the only place with um, indigenous communities. There are so many places in all over the world. And you, as leaders in healthcare, how do you approach these or integrate these practices into your healthcare systems, or if you have any project ongoing or anything trying to include this into your practices?
Okay. I can start. It's a very important point. Clinical trial diversity has been a very important area for us. But I personally found that it was very limited. And it wasn't really encompassing the issues that we are seeing and facing with health equity. And so I think the first thing that we have tried to do is to build trust. And I would say that everything is downstream of that trust, because we have lost the trust of patients. We don't have it. And so we have to meet patients where they are. We can't just simply say we're going to have a medically representative clinical trial population. We have to actually understand the cultural barriers, the communication. I will give you an example. We had a hackathon, and my topic for the organization was clinical trial diversity, health equity. And you'll be surprised that the project that we found won the prize was clinicaltrials.gov, which is managed by the NIH, National Institutes of Health in the United States, does not communicate clinical trials at a level that an average patient can understand. So we're done. We're done at that gateway point, because a patient who's searching, their family who's searching, they're never going to find the trial, but let alone participate. So I have hired a head of health equity about 2 years ago, and the job for my head of head of health equity is to really think about what are all the things that we need to address from a principal perspective. After that, we're doing a lot in terms of expanded access programs, going to the countries, post-trial access, but they're all downstream. Trust is the first thing, so we're focusing on building trust.
Mona?
Oh, there's too many factors. That's fine.
I love that we started with Guatemala, by the way. Thank you.
Hi, thank you so much for what was a very inspiring panel. I'm Justine from Latvia. I represent a company called Longenesis. We're the leading health tech data startup in the Baltics. And I personally am in charge of operations. So when we talk about regulatory hurdles, that speaks straight to my heart, and I know too much about it. And from that perspective, just to illustrate, we create a platform which allows and we help various, whether it's hospitals, doctors, and so on, identify patients who need a drug that's already in the market so that they reach them faster. But the number of times where we have helped hospitals basically just structure the data that they have either on paper to identify those patients, and we have asked whether we are a certified medical device is actually quite painful. And of course, you can understand the side of the regulators and so on. There's a lot of if I can say, almost shady stuff happening in the world, and of course, you need something to prove your track record and something to be able to base your experience on. But I'm wondering, with everything that we're talking about here, about one wanting to be competitive, being innovative, and coming up with new solutions, including AI, and basically doing very similar things, is the industry going to lead the charge on sort of encouraging deregulation of this? Because situations like ours are not extremely unique in that perspective. And these requirements often also come from the biggest players in the industry, which, in our opinion, kind of like almost slows down different types of innovation, because track record is not enough. You want a specific paper for every single application of the same algorithm. So any reflections on this would be
Any
really nice.
particular panelist or put you on the spot?
I don't know. I think IQVIA might have some input on this.
Yeah, so I think you raise extremely good points, and I do think it will be a combination between small companies and larger corporates that make the difference. The reason for that, as you just said, how do you have a track record? We partner with a lot of different companies of various sizes. We tend to take the major responsibility when it comes to financial sustainability. You have a track record for the last 50 years. Yes, we've been around for 85 years. So pick your partners wisely, because the voice of a large company like IQVIA is powerful, if you want to call it that, because we are in over 100 countries. We do speak with government representatives. That's my day job, effectively. So we work with companies on the panel to try to get their clinical trials in Ghana, for example, and do all of this kind of stuff. So pick your partners wisely. There's enough to go around. That's the other thing I always tell people. Don't think it has to be your own thing. Share that burden as well. And the more voices that are having this conversation, the faster it will change. And if you need someone with information governance experience for 15 years and has a certification in something training, you'll get that from IQVIA. Right? So pick your partners wisely. That's how you accelerate faster. And yeah, there is enough to go around. It's not that it always has to be divided up 50-50, or someone's going to try to take advantage. The voice being louder is the only thing you need to worry about. But it's happening. It's changing slowly. And in Latvia in particular, with the COVID recovery and resilience funds that have been released, I know Latvia has been, we've done some projects there. There's been a huge change even in 5 years. So it is moving. People are demanding it, and it's happening. So keep up the fight and contact me later.
Well, thanks. First of all, thank you, all of you, for being here and investing your time from your full agenda, imagine, and sharing your own experience. So I will try to keep it short, my question. Hope. So this is maybe mostly for Dr. Maria. She was bringing this topic about sustainability and manufacturing. So I'm a PhD student and I'm working with stem cells, differentiating them in bioreactors and basically doing hard egg cells. And then we are transplanting them into animal models such as pigs or monkeys to see if we can recover the heart function after a myocardial infarction. So first, we would like to do this in humans, but of course, it's decades in future. So my short question would be, because this is the problem we have, and then this is the topic you were bringing as well about generating these global teams, global consortiums, and part of this EU consortium. But sometimes I think it's hard to unify one thing from people around the globe. So my question is more about this manufacturing thing. What's your input, or which kind of agencies or policymakers are out there talking about GMP strategy? Because everyone just says in the lab, we are GMP compliant. And then it's just like, what do you mean by GMP compliant? And then it changes every year or every 2 years. And then we just share papers and say like GMP light, GMP compliant. So that's what's your input in this topic of GMP? Or is there any agencies? Like sometimes I feel like I'm lost. Like, how do I claim myself? I'm working on a GMP light environment. Yeah. Got it.
To the expert.
Yeah, I don't think you can use the we are GMP compliant so really, if I may say. So to manufacture in accordance with GMPs, first of all, you need a license from your local health authority. So the site where you are manufacturing needs a license. So that's the first step. Then you will need an approval for a particular product. Of course, you are not there yet, so no worries. But what I'm trying to say is it is not so easy. Now, earlier in the process, there are some requirements. It's not exactly the same when you are in research. So I would say let's discuss that outside so that I don't bore the whole audience, but we can talk about it later. But there is no such a thing of, yeah, we are DMP, you cannot use that for free.
Okay. Because we've got about 15 minutes left. And one of the things I want to wrap up is to give everybody on the panel a chance to have their say on something that you can all take away from the end of this. So we're going to go through, but we can try and keep the questions nice and punchy. So I'm gonna put you on the spot.
Hi, my name is Christos. I recently finished my PhD and now I'm working on a bug discovery startup. And my question had to do with AI and sustainability. So you all mentioned sustainability goals, but you also talked about how AI is being increasingly used. And so my question is that AI requires a lot of power and water and, things like that. So I'm interested to see how companies are balancing or reconciling their sustainability goals with their use of AI.
I'll take that one because we're in the process of putting together our annual sustainability report. And for the first time, this has come up. And it's one of these things that we can make a little bit of a joke about it because you think, well, of course, these systems are going to be generating a lot of power. Yes. We don't have servers in every country. They need a certain amount of cooling. It's a huge, huge endeavor. And we're saying around the world that we need data to be standardized, curated, put together so we can do all of these analyses. Well, what if you just can't? Right? If you don't have the amount of electricity needed to have a cooling fan in a room to be able to, you just simply can't. So for the first time this year, we've been asked to do this. And like I said, we've always tried to stay ahead of the curve with respect to making sure our labs are green and taking different initiatives. Even the buildings that we have, even if we don't own them, we put in certain things as well. I think you'll see this mandated as part of ESG reporting or sustainability reporting, whatever the new buzzword is now, as a way to be able to try to make this more accessible to many more people, but also to cut the cost down so it doesn't cost 5 billion to make a drug in 3 years' time. It's happening.
I guess what I would add is that, yeah, it is the Wild West, isn't it, at the moment in terms of the AI sort of world. It's all still developing. But as time goes on, there's those people who are going to use AI to produce a product. The product isn't the AI itself, so it will be judged in its own right. And then your choice of which AI tool you are using, increasing in the future, I think you'll start to look at the sustainability of that supplier and take that into account when you're making the decision who to go to. It's harder at the moment because there's less choice and everything's changing so fast. But in the future, it'll become more like a simple supplier choice.
I do want to add one thing. They tried to kind of bite at this problem and two solution. One is that we've put into place what we call an AI capabilities team, and we've thought about the consequences or to ESG of AI. And we have said that governance needs to be in place. And I think governance needs to be in place, but we need clearer principles for the governance. But you do need a structure because it is quickly becoming unmanageable. And we have that accountability as the world needs this.
And it's typical, is it? You think we're looking at finally getting things like fridges, solar powered fridges to sustain with vaccines for development of vaccines in certain markets. And then you're talking about AI. There's a big wealth difference. Thank you. Who's-
Hi. Thanks for the interesting discussion. I'm Levente. I work at a startup in Barcelona, Spain. So my question is very simple. What about China? So how integrated is it into the global ecosystem? And it has a large population, a lot of data. Are there any special regulation, and do we have any special approaches um, to this large country? Thank you.
I can start and maybe others want to contribute. So we have recognized that it's a very important area in terms of drug development. So I have what I call a China R&D hub. Is one of my 4 hubs in the world. China, Japan, UK, and Cambridge are the 4 hubs. Cambridge, Massachusetts. And so China is really, really important. And I think what I would say is that we have access to a very important population. They make up a big part of the world population. The other piece I think that's really important and what switched it on in a big way for us was regulatory stability. So the regulatory reform in China has been pretty tremendous in the last few years. What do I mean by that? More predictable, clear access, and interest in moving patients' interests forward and getting drugs to patients. So that was the reason I formed it. We've done quite well in terms of recruitment. I think there are still a lot of things that need to be worked out in terms of data privacy and intellectual property. So those continue to be areas we're managing. The other thing I think is it's very interesting, but through some of our programs, what I have personally learned is that the phenotype of the patient who may have the same disease is not necessarily the same. So some of the model assumptions need to be tested. So we need better practices and processes to address that. And I think there is a very big high innovation explosion. So we should all be tapping into that. So that's the other piece. I won't go into detail.
Yeah, I look at it for a very different lens because we're right at the start of the food chain, if you like. We're funding research out of academia. And I guess we're intrigued to see what's going to happen. So I went to AACR, which is a giant cancer conference I have every year. And as I've gone there each year and you walk around the posters now, for every sort of one Western economy type poster, there are 5 Chinese posters. Yeah, and the fast following is moving to follow and overtake. And this is what we're interested in is, will this start to lead to a change in the way we do our startups? Remember, I live in a world of intellectual property and very early stage things. And are we going to start seeing more stealth startups? Are we going to start seeing less patent filings to keep things secret for longer? Is that good for society when we all start duplicating the same experiments because we're not filing patents to let other people see what we're doing? There are a number of ramifications from the system we're going to have to come to terms with. We don't know the answer yet.
I was just going to add, I did some work with a Chinese business coming to Europe, and they had a database of 56 million rare disease patients. And their plan was to bring in products from other markets. And they could point to the fact that there was a a plan for 2050 in terms of health equality. So in terms of looking ahead, the Chinese are looking way behind, what maybe other governments might be doing right now in terms of the future. But they also switched it off. So 2 years into that process, they said, actually, we don't want to share that database. So it was immediately switched off. So, and that's probably still the challenge of understanding where it fits and how you manage that. If you're making investment decisions, as you said, it's a great question. Yeah. Oh, right. Whoever's haven't quite got time for 15 more questions, but we'll do our best.
Hi. So I'm Jayan from the Philippines, but I'm currently doing my PhD in Germany. So I worked a few years in drug discovery in the Philippines, and also coming from the previous keynote speaker, I was shocked to see that in the US, proficiency of citizens to, accessing healthcare is 12% only, and this is significantly lower in the Philippines as also in other countries. And so we've been talking about innovations in healthcare and how to move everything forward and to include all populations. But how do we make sure that these actually reach these people? Like especially in my case, I know particularly personally that indigenous communities in my area don't are intimidated or don't even understand how to access these healthcare services or products. So I guess in your companies and organizations, and for us young leaders here, how do we make sure that in this era of exponential innovation, how do we make sure no one is left behind?
Mm, I start that one. A couple of comments that were made by various different members of the panel was taking healthcare to the patient. Right? Many of us right now, we are probably feeling pretty good. We've turned up today. It's fine. We don't really think of ourselves as patients, but just put yourself in the shoes, as you said, of someone who lives 200 kilometers from the nearest community center or hospital. Would you really spend 3 days traveling beyond a clinical trial? No. And is it, would you feel a little bit better? Maybe. You don't know anything about clinical studies. Do you think they're going to treat you like a guinea pig, which people still use, right? If you don't get it, why would you sign up for it? So we need to think much differently about taking healthcare to the individual and to the citizen. And part of this is we're in the ground where all the countries that we work across, you don't see me. I go to visit maybe, but you don't see me on the ground. It's in China for China, it's in Spain for Spain. That's always been our motto. Healthcare is different in every country. And we don't try to have focal points in major cities. It's also, can we tap into community pharmacy? In a lot of countries, the pharmacist is where you go in, you have a conversation with them. They know that your child has fallen down and you had to buy plasters for them. They know the next time you went in that you were telling them that the child was getting teeth. They know more about your health care, and they actually can pick up on subtle differences as well. Should we use community pharmacy differently? Why does it have to be a fancy institution? Drones are now being used to deploy various different methodologies to help people who have had heart attacks and things like that. Think about it differently. You are the future of healthcare. Don't do the stuff that has been tried and tested for many years. It doesn't work. We don't have a healthcare system. We have a sickness system, right? We only treat sick people. Let's not think about that. Think about how you're going to make it a healthcare system, not a sickness system, and take healthcare to people.
Mhm. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Um, there might be time for one more question shortly, but I just thought it would be lovely if it's okay to just go along to each of the panelists just to give um, a very quick thought about what they can take away from your experience, your expertise. I mean, I'm sitting here and just, you even had an example for Latvia. But the fact that there's this knowledge in the room, tap into that. So can I go around? I'll start, Maria, as you're next to me, if that's okay. What would you like everyone to take away from today?
Well, I think you can see the complexity of the problem from development to accessing to patients from a commercial perspective. And you may be working in different areas. Whatever you choose to progress your career in, make sure you make a difference.
I think it's been really very interesting to be here. Wonderful panelists and great questions. And I know we didn't get to them all. My recommendation would be to whatever you do, whichever area you step into, step out of it to ensure that you understand the big picture. Because it's very important to have depth, but it's critical to understand the breadth if you want to get to patient. And so make sure you are lobbying, advocating for patients to really get the innovations that you are contributing to.
And I would say, I guess, yeah, again, the very beginning of things is to unleash that inner entrepreneur in all of you. I know many of you are in startups anyway, but we are seeing a cultural change. Too many times we lament, certainly in the UK, we lament about, oh, we're very good at researching stuff and we're not very good at commercializing it. We lack an entrepreneurial culture. But I don't subscribe to that view anymore because I'm seeing a whole new generation of people coming through who are bringing with them a really entrepreneurial, vibrant culture and a real a drive to make a change and do good in the world. So unleash that entrepreneur and go out there and do some good.
Yeah, I think I've touched upon many of my reflections in the answer that I provided thus far, but I would probably just ask you to be curious, stay curious, ask the questions. As Priya said, it's not just about the point solution, unfortunately. You might get very excited about the thing that you're working on, but unless you understand that you don't have to be an expert at the whole entire journey, but just take that step back so that you can actually see the impact and the other things that need to change as well along that journey. But stay curious, and no one's ever spontaneously combusted, so just go for it.
Thank you. If you do have specific questions, don't forget we will be around briefly. You'll have to grab Priya before she gets her flight. But apart from that, can I just say a massive thank you to the team?